Hi there and welcome to another development diary work in progress for Dominion's planetary renderer called Maggy. So the work in progress this time is we have some deformation now being applied to the surface of the sphere patches, so we can actually start getting some height into the terrain for the planets. Not that it's particularly exciting at the minute, we're just basically deforming the terrain. As you can see, it's now no longer a perfectly uniform sphere. We're just experimenting with the algorithms and the noise functions that we're going to be using to produce the proper terrain. So we can see here some of the parameters we can tweak. We have a noise function, number of octaves, which I'll go over in a second, persistence and scaling. So these parameters basically will affect the outcome of the height samples at each particular vertex where those quads and triangles are meeting. So octaves increase or decrease the computational complexity and increase the variety of the noise functions as they go through. So each sample is iterated multiple times. So 15 octaves, 16 octaves there. Every sample gets sampled 16 times at least. So it's computationally very heavy, and at the minute it's very easy to just stall the entire CPU. Again, I'll just modestly point out that this is very crap. All work in progress, experimenting stuff as we try and figure out how the best approach is to work. There's no patch stitching, no normals being calculated, no lighting, etc. So we're just tinkering with the scaling. So if we produce a terrain, we can increase or decrease the mountain range sizes, and generally muck around with the parameters to then fly over the surface that we've had as a result. You can see there's some patch geometry there not being clipped, so there's still a bit of work there to be doing to optimize it. Experimenting with the noise functions is an art and a science in itself. Trying to produce ones that actually give you decent results consistently is an art form. Here you can see there's a major feature on the surface of this world that kind of looks like a raised plateau stroke iceberg with a crater in it. These would be highly undesirable unless deliberately brought in through the noise functions that we're using. This one's a very simple one. It is simplex noise. Altering the persistence allows us to alter where these features tend to arise, but ultimately sometimes you'll tweak it and end up with nothing. Okay, so this is the first warts and all version of trying to bring in lighting to make it solid. As you can see, yes, it succeeded in making it solid, but fail as far as lighting is concerned. So here we go. Now we've got some normals being calculated. Again, there is a bug in the normal calculation. It's not correct, but it gives you some sort of sense of shading at least now coming in onto the terrain surface. You can see the patch splits there now because we're solid. They stand out a bit clearer. These are where the vertices between patches aren't aligned, and therefore you get seams appear. So that's one of the things that has to be addressed with the patch skirts or patch stitching, whichever one turns out to be the most reliable. As you can see, we have a field of green, and there's some patches that have been clipped a bit aggressively, so we'll sort that out in the frustrum cull. But now we can start tinkering with the parameters and we'll see a bit more of an effect from these. So as we alter the persistence, you can see the effect it has on the terrain. Introduces more variety. Not necessarily great variety. One thing that's become apparent already is this is a very, like I say, naive terrain renderer. It's not threaded, it's not using batch geometries, it's not using vertex buffers. It is just brute force at the moment, just to get the techniques in place and experiment a little bit. But one thing that is very apparent is it's very easy to cripple the CPU even at this early stage. I mean, there's only 7,000, 8,000 samples being made there, or vertices, sorry, but then with 12 octaves, that's 12 times 7,000 for argument's sake. It's easy to cripple it. I suppose worth pointing out, one of the goals to have the planetary rendering landing is that you can actually land anywhere and interact with the scenery anywhere on the planet. So there'll be flora, fauna to interact with depending on whether it's a planet that supports life, and you can place a base anywhere on one of these planets. There could be cities if it's a populated planetoid, which you'd be able to fly around, that would have inhabitants and ships flying around, all generated procedurally. So the goal is to be able to A, produce this content if none has been authored, and B, allow an author to override the content as well and merge in what they wish and place it where they like. Here you can just see I'm experimenting with the Perlin interpolated noise, which with the same parameters totally cripples the renderer. So there's either a bug in my Perlin, more than likely, or I'll need to do a better approach. Okay, so this will be a little bit more interesting now. I've introduced another parameter, input scaling. So basically a noise function takes two parameters, an x and y, on a 2D grid to produce a height, and depending on where those parameters land would vary the height sample you get back. So noise scaling now is altering the parameters and I'm passing into the function, as well as all the other parameters that you can tweak to introduce a bit more variety in the heights. So if you ramp up the samples a little bit so get some nice tessellation going, and then alter the scaling. So what you'll see now is features will roll or march across the landscape. The camera isn't actually moving and neither is the planet, but the parameters being passed into the input function are being scrolled effectively, scaled up and down. Here there's 9 times what they were before, and you can see already the samples variety is much smoother, much better and far more varied. We're still getting these odd aberration features popping up. They look like tower blocks there, you can just see turret style. But you've got a far better rolling landscape now with some steep valley sides. So the combinations of all these parameters are what will be used and varied through random seeds, so each planet is unique, but the goal is to try and find styles of planets that fit with these parameters. So you'll have a barren moon surface with some craters versus a very rocky hilly terrain for an inhabited world perhaps, or a dune-like desert world where it's just sand dunes across the entire surface. So if I just quickly do a hack into the engine and make the renderer go solid again, and please excuse the duff normals that have been calculated, but at least show a little bit more interesting scenery than wireframe does. There we go. So that's one of those very strange looking towers. Perhaps it could be an artificial alien construction, but it's not what I was after, so it must go. So like I say, it's not threaded, it's definitely not optimal, and it certainly isn't very pretty at the minute, but it does show the basic technique in play. I appreciate, again, from what I've seen on YouTube, they're far, far better. But who knows, we'll look back at this in a year's time and go, wow, how bad was it, and how good is it then? So again here, just tweaking with the input scaling, camera's not moving, the world is not moving, I'm just altering the scale of the parameters being passed in. which advances the height samples to make the landscape a bit more interesting, and then we can adjust the scale of the output to make it a more bland but slightly undulating landscape, or a nice taller, more mountainous and more vertiginous. Alternate persistence the other way, we get far sharper terrain, slightly more alien looking, excusing the normals again obviously, but the more you tweak the persistence, the more you get horrible terrain like this. So it's a kind of checks and balances approach. And it's very easy to end up with horrific terrains such as this. Here you can see that there's a very regular pattern in the height samples being produced, and as we animate the scaling you can see they're just constantly rippling across. One interesting side effect of course is that this is then the surface of an ocean, or can be used to produce the surface of an ocean. However, as far as terrain is concerned, less than desirable. But this will be used to emulate ocean surfaces in the engine on top of the planet as well, as a separate layer. And here I'm just experimenting with the purling function again, which is clearly heavily damaged. This is 5 octaves and it's crippling the CPU. You can see the frame rate's now probably about 1 frame per second. So that's got to go. But the next stage, once I've finished tweaking all this, will be to push it onto the GPU. And I can already tell there's a bug with the patches being visible there in the frustum. That's way too high. It should be about 300. So I've got another bug to sort out there. Right, thank you for watching. I appreciate it's very dull at the moment. Again, this is just a dev diary to show you some work in progress, which I thought might be interesting to see from the inside track. Thanks for watching.